Hi, and welcome back to Continual. I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and tonight we're going to be talking about what are the things that scared our panelists? What are the things that have woven their ways into their minds, and what might be waving their ways back out in their different works? Before we get started and go too far down that path, let's go around and see who has joined us for the evening. So, Kiki, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. My name is Kiki Burrelli, and I am a gay paranormal romance author. And I think my first two loves have been horror and romance, and I'm glad that I get to sort of play with both in my career.
Equally terrifying. John, how about you?
I'm John L. French, retired CSI from Baltimore City Police Department. I write crime, pulp, fantasy, cryptid fiction, and of course, horror.
Jenny?
I'm Gini Koch. I write the Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Dog Books, and I also write under a variety of other pen names and in every length and genre, including horror.
I'm Seanan McGuire, and I have a name no one can pronounce or spell, which is awesome. I write primarily urban fantasy and modern portal fiction, but I also write horror and biomedical science fiction thrillers under the name Mira Grant.
And Tonia.
I also have one of those names that no one spells or says right the first time, so I feel your pain. I'm Tonia Ransom. I'm the creator and executive producer of Nightlight, a horror podcast that features creepy tales written by Black all over the world. I am also an author of a novel called Risen. I am working on my second audio drama that is Lovecraft Country meets True Blood, so definitely horror on that as well. Aside from that, I also do some screenwriting, and I'm trying to turn my podcast into a TV show. So, everybody say a little prayer, cross your fingers, sacrifice a goat, whatever.
So let's actually start by talking about fear, because fear is one of the most primal things that we have. It's meant to be there to keep us alive, generally keep us from doing stupid things. It doesn't work out well for me frequently, but from a fear standpoint, and Kiki, I'm going to start with you on this one. What is it for you? What is kind of that one primal thing for you, and what is it meant for you from a fear standpoint?
What does fear mean, or what is my biggest fear?
Let's start with, what does it really mean for you? How's it work its way in? How much influence has it had on you?
Yeah, so fear is it's an emotion that you can't avoid. But when you put it in the context of horror, it's one that you can control. So I guess I have always looked at my fear as something that I can control if I want to. And I'm like trying to think of other stuff as I hear. And it's basically just like the unknown, like what is out there that I don't know is out there, that knows that I'm there, basically, is how I look at fear.
How about you, John?
Fear to me is the warning bell. Something is wrong, and you have to decide what you're going to do about it. You don't really have that long to make the decision. You can run away, but that's compounded by the fear of if I run away, everybody's going to think I'm scared and a coward and all that. Or you can charge forward. And again, there's that fear that if I charge forward, I'm going to die, maybe. So it's basically, you have to kind of make that split-second decision, which in itself can scare the hell out of people. I think, fear is something that we have within us, and each person reacts to it differently.
How about you, Jenny?
Well, I always look at it as you've got fight, flight, or freeze. Personally, I tend to be a fight, rarely a flight. but I freeze around snakes. That's my biggest fear. I'm terrified of snakes, just pathologically, ridiculously terrified of snakes.
Me too.
They are, every snake grows to at least 6 feet in length and turns venomous in my presence. I don't care if it's this big and innocent. It's a mad-eating, bloodthirsty killer if it's near me in my mind. And I have done a lot to try to overcome that. And really, it's not worth the effort because I can pretend I'm not scared, but I actually am. But I can freeze in a snake presence. I will run in a snake presence, but anything else for the most part, I'm a fight. And I think that we're wired in certain ways. Each person is wired. I don't think about, ooh, will someone think I'm a coward if I freeze or if I scream or if I run? I don't really care. If something has frightened me enough that I've screamed, you get to hear about it. If something is frightening enough that I think I need to step forward and throw people behind me, I'm not thinking about what anybody else is thinking of me. I'm thinking about the threat and how I can stop the threat. And the same thing, if I'm running away, I'm not thinking, ooh, does somebody think I'm a chicken? I'm thinking, please let those sprinting skills from way back when still be working. So I don't know how much thought you have in those moments. I agree with John, that's very fast when it happens. But I think we forget about freeze a lot because we hear fight or flight, but freeze is actually really a thing. You know, like the deer in the headlights, they're frozen. They don't want to get hit by a car. They just froze. That was their reaction. So I think that is how, for me, I guess in that sense, it's affected my life. I'm very aware of it. Like I said, I tend to be a fight more than a flight or a freeze.
Shannon, how about you?
Fear is one of the few places where we can really completely surrender to our limbic systems. It's not always rational. It's not always actually based on survival. Ginny mentions that snakes become giant. I'm a herpetologist. I study snakes as part of what makes me happy and fulfilled. So the two of us are clearly wired very differently there. But, fear it's like orgasm. It is a way for your limbic system to tense and then release. It doesn't matter if you enjoy it. It is still good for you. And it is also related to disgust. It will teach you things that you should avoid. No. So, snakes, it is good to be afraid of snakes. There are venomous snakes. It is good to be afraid of spiders. There are venomous spiders. It is good to be afraid of pathogens and of violence and of all of these other things. Fear is important. I have always sought out fear in controlled circumstances. With horror movies, I was the kid watching them at 6. But if you turn off the horror movie before it ends, you can cause me long-term trauma because now I don't know how you defeat the monster. And that is the most important part of enjoyable fear for me, is that it has to have a how you win. You have to have a way out.
How about you, Tonia?
I'd like to add on to something that Shannon just said, that nightmares kind of work the same way. If I don't get to finish a nightmare, that gives me a whole lot of stress the next day. Like if I wake up in the middle of it before I've slayed the monster, or whatever the issue is, it works the same way I think as horror movies do for you. But as far as like what scares me, like my brain's kind of screwed up because I have PTSD. So like I know I'm afraid of things that I should not be afraid of. Like mentally, I'm not afraid of it, but my body reacts with this fear response, which is usually a flee response. Sometimes it's more of a fawn response. It just kind of depends on like, is it an actual trigger or is it, something that is sort of trigger adjacent, I guess you should say. And then, I have like regular fear, and I can tell the difference between like something that I should be afraid of because, my brain is telling me that I should be afraid of it and not just my body at that point. But, for me, fear has two very different aspects. One that just lives in my body that are not things that I should actually be afraid of, but then things that, encompass my body and my mind that I'm like, okay, I should be afraid of it. Except for snakes. Like I know that I shouldn't be afraid of most snakes. I grew up in deep Southeast Texas. Like there are snakes everywhere, and honestly, I think it's the reason that I am afraid of snakes is because I was playing what's that game where you bounce the balls at 2 square, 4 square with my sister once, and she was like, "Hey, you're stepping on a snake," and I thought, she's my sister, of course she's not telling me the truth, like she's just messing with me. And like I feel something tap the back of my leg, and it was a snake. And like since that day, like I have been terrified of snakes. Like I can spot them 100 yards away, like, "Yep, there's a snake, we're not going that direction, we're going over here instead," kind of thing. And I've tried to get over my phobia because I still live in Texas. There are still a lot of snakes. I spend a lot of time hiking and out in the woods. Like it is a bad thing for me to be as afraid of snakes as I am, but it's also a good thing because I can spot them from so far away, even if they're camouflaged, and we have like rattlesnakes where I live. So that's an important skill to actually have. So, I'm kind of on the fence because I don't want to be, powerless essentially in a situation where I run into a snake, but I also want to keep my ability to recognize them from very, very far away because it keeps me and my safer. So I don't know. There's that, I guess.
So when we talk about those things that scare us, all of us have written in things that are driven by fear. Sometimes we want to drive our readers' fears. Sometimes we want to go and explore those fears as authors. So what's something whether it's a book, a movie, TV, something like that, that when you saw it just really scared the hell out of you? It's one of those things that still rides with you till this day. I mean, for me, it was probably seeing The Exorcist at way too young an age and being a Southern altar boy, but that's neither here nor there. For you guys, what's the thing that you saw that has left an imprint on you ever since? So John, how about you?
The first time I remember being not just scared, but terrified, like turning to the back of your seat and trying to burrow through to the floor. I don't know how old I was. My mother took me and my sister to see an animated movie. I mean, it's a cartoon. What could be wrong with it? Called The Snow Queen. I don't remember anything about the movie. I do remember being scared as hell for the very first time. And to this day, I will have nothing to do with anything vaguely resembling the Snow Queen. And that includes that Frozen movie. It's just I'm okay with it now, but I just do not want to see the movie. It could be a Snow Queen movie with every star in the world, with every major star. They could offer to fly me to Hollywood for the premiere where I will meet all the stars and each one of them will give me a gift. I probably wouldn't go just because it's the Snow Queen. And the other thing, I mean, I'm well over this particular trauma, but the first time I saw The Wizard of Oz, I'm sure that's the source of a lot of childhood trauma there. The thing that scared me the most wasn't the monkeys. I like the monkeys. It wasn't the house falling on the witch. It was the witch flying past Dorothy's window as the tornado was swirling around. And I went to bed, and my bed was kind of like parallel to the window, and I used to sleep on the side closest to the window. Thereafter, I slept on the side furthest away from the window to give me that much more time to get out of the room when the witch came through.
All right, Jenny, what's the thing that got you?
So many things, because I am afraid of a lot of things. I will start with, I'm afraid of the dark. I've been afraid of the dark since I was a little kid. The dark's never hurt me, by the way, and I'm a night person, so you'd think I would love the dark, but I'm still afraid of the dark. I think I was like 9, and UCSB that's University of California, Santa Barbara, which was about 30 minutes away from where I grew up in Ventura, California. And they were doing some big German film thing, and they had an image of Nosferatu, the vampire, on the flyer that they mailed out, and I saw it. And at that point on, anytime I had to take the garbage out, walk to the trash can, I knew Nosferatu was lurking there. I've never seen the movie, mind you. I've seen one image, and that terrified me. We move up to teenage years, and foolishly, I'm at the drive-in with a very nice guy, and we're going to see Boulevard Nights, which, let me mention, is not a cinematic masterpiece that anybody other than me and probably this poor guy remembers, but it was bracketed by Phantasm, and I don't go to horror movies, and all the things about the horror movie that were supposed to scare me didn't, but I'm scared at the end. I'm not scared of the thing flying into people's heads. I'm scared of Angus Scrimm. And at the end of this movie, the kid who we've been following, you think he's woken up from a dream, and his friend is like, his brother's best friend is like, I'm going to take you away, and blah blah blah. And the kid relaxes, and so do I. And he walks up the stairs and closes his closet door, and Angus Scrimm goes, boy, and reaches through and pulls him into hell. I screamed so loud that men from 8 cars over came running because everybody thought I was being raped. And my poor date is like holding his ear because I practically deafened him. And I'm just like screaming at the screen, right? So Phantasm truly scarred me for life. I can spot any of the actors in it in any role, and I'll just look, like I'll flip through a channel and there'll be some atmospheric thing. I'll be like, I think this is another Phantasm movie, and it always is. It's like, and I turn the page. Poltergeist did similar to me. I was crawling under the seats in a theater in Hollywood. You never want to be on the floor in the movie theater in Hollywood, and I'm on the floor crawling under the seats. But what killed it for me, what really did it, which told me that I'm afraid of everything, Stephen King's Night Shift, that collection of short stories, and particularly The Boogeyman. I'm a great big grown-up girl, and I still, to this day, cannot be in a room with a door that's open just a crack. It has to be closed tight or open as wide as it can go. It can't be just a crack. So I'm afraid of everything, but those 4 things, just, boy, I want to be scared about anything, or just I'm happily walking down the street and all of a sudden that image of Nosferatu jumps up. I'm like, ah. So yeah, I'm very easy to scare.
Next convention, I'll bring my copy with me. Seanan?
The original, not the remake.
Oh no, I've got copies of the original. Seanan?
Sorry, I'm muted between talks because my cat is yowling at me a lot tonight, so I have to get to the button. I got messed up by the Twilight Zone. Not the original, the revival, the one that started in 85. J. Michael Straczynski wrote an episode called Something in the Walls, where a woman was, you know how the human eye looks for faces and things? That is a natural thing. It happens to everyone. If you come to my house, we have the weirdest popcorn ceiling I've ever seen. It's covered in dicks. Everyone who looks up at my ceiling starts finding human penises. There's one place where you can find literally a peacock made out of dicks. It's amazing. So you look for patterns in things. Well, this woman is looking for patterns in things, and what she starts to see are faces literally pushing their way out of the patterns to watch our dimension. And she realizes the things in the patterns are real. She's not hallucinating. They're definitely there. And then they realize she can see them, and they don't like that. They don't like that at all. So they start coming to get her. So she checks herself into a sanitarium, which is the logical thing to do when invisible things are trying to crawl out of the patterns to eat you, and is living in a completely white room with nothing that can make patterns at all. All of her clothing is solid colored. She's avoiding patterns. And her new doctor comes in and meets her and is told about her psychosis, and, basically says, I'll help you. I'll help you. The next day, there's a huge rainstorm that night. The next day, he meets her at the front desk, checking herself out and wearing a beautiful flowered scarf. And she says, it's all right. I was wrong. And then we pan to her room, and we see that the ceiling, that water has seeped through the ceiling in the night and formed a pattern of water stains. And for just a moment, her face pushes through the pattern, screaming. So I became convinced that I could be pulled through patterns by evil creatures that lived on the other side. And since it's so difficult to explain, no one could convince me otherwise. It's like the Mr. Rogers song, "You Won't Go Down the Drain." How many kids are afraid that they're going to run down the drain because Mr. Rogers felt it was necessary to tell them they wouldn't? So I am just terrified of things in the patterns. I wore only solid colored clothes for like 2 years because the things in the patterns might get me. And then I realized My Little Ponies had patterns on them, and I kind of got over that much of it, but I'm still afraid of it. So there's a movie called The Frighteners.
Yeah.
That begins with a long sequence where a thing is actively lunging out of the patterned wallpaper and the patterned rug and trying to assault people. And, you know, it's normal that you discuss your fears with your friends. People know what scares you. I'm not going to show Ginny Anaconda or Piranhaconda, even though I like to show everyone Piranhaconda because it's so incredibly stupid. It's got a surf rock theme song. Who doesn't want to watch a movie about an apex predator that's a piranha anaconda hybrid with a surf rock theme? So, you know what bothers your friends, and you don't show them the movies that are actively approaching a trauma trigger. But Thing in the Patterns is so weird that no one remembers it. So my friend Mars put on The Frighteners thinking I'd enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I screamed, curled into a fetal ball on her couch, and nearly wet myself, because it had been so long since I was confronted with that particular fear at that particular volume. There are other things that messed me up, but really it was Something in the Walls by J. Michael Straczynski on the new Twilight Zone that damaged my psyche forever.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Tonia?
Oh, y'all are not going to like my answer. There's never been a book or a movie or a TV show that actually scared me. And I started watching horror like pretty young. I've got older brothers. My dad loved horror. So I watched Halloween. Oh God, I didn't watch the whole movie, but I watched a good chunk of it. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old. And then Candyman was the first horror movie that I saw like beginning to end. And it's funny because I didn't grow up like in the best household. And so anytime I watched a scary movie and there was, some sort of monster in the movie, I imagined the monster to save me. And so I was never scared by any of those things because I thought, oh, this is a thing that's more powerful than the thing that I'm actually afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And if it exists, maybe I can convince it to save me somehow. And I think that's probably why like it never scared, because I used to tell myself bedtime stories at night. I would imagine various monsters, vampires, werewolves, ghosts, run-of-the-mill serial killers and kidnappers, basically like coming to my aid. Like the monsters in my stories were always not necessarily the protagonist, but they were the ones who saved the protagonist rather than being the actual antagonist. So like I've thought about that a lot because a lot of people have asked me this question, like surely something, you've watched has scared you. And no, it's been real life stuff that's been the scariest for me.
Now we know where the inspiration for Monsters Inc. came from. How about you, Kiki? I
can remember the first thing that really truly scared me, and it was that short story called The Green Ribbon, and it was included in a book called In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories, written by Alvin Schwartz. And it's about this girl, and you meet her when she's a child, and she has this green ribbon around her neck her entire life, and then she meets a man and she gets married, and then he really wants her to take the green ribbon off, and she tells him, no, I can't. And then at the very end, she's like, fine, I'll take it off for you. And she takes the green ribbon off, spoiler alert, and her head falls off. And it scarred me. I just remember reading it because I really loved reading from a very young age. And I remember coming upon the story and just the feeling of obvious dread that stayed with me from the very first page and just continued to grow until the end, because you knew something was coming and that you weren't going to be able to stop it. So I think that was my first real moment of fear. And then later on, when I was in grade school, was when I was first introduced to the concept of urban legends, particularly the one of Bloody Mary, and about how like saying her name in the bathroom 3 times, you all know it. And I could not sleep for probably a week afterwards, after I was first told that in school. And I remember one night my mom was like, if you went to the mirror and you said gold, gold, gold 3 times, would you have gold? Like, she was just at her wits' end trying to get this poor terrified girl to fall asleep. And then finally, the last one thing that probably really shaped me as a person was Jaws, because since watching that movie, I have had not just a fear, but a phobia of deep water, anything that is in the deep, that pictures of the ocean where the water's clear and then you get to that murky bit where you can't see anymore. All of that just makes my heart pound. And I think I can thank Jaws for that.
So when we look at and talk about these stories, here's a question I've got for you, because one of the things I remember that really threw me off way more as a kid, and again, I probably read this much younger than I should have and saw some of the things much younger than I should have, but are the things that create the most deepest fears in you things that are plausible and realistic, or are they the things that are more fantastical? I mean, like for me, growing up when I did in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of stuff out there on nuclear war. There was a lot of, things out there on how those kinds of things would break down. And I read a lot of them back in those days. I mean, so, going through and looking and saying, well, society would go this way, society would go that way. What are the things for you? Is it more about the reality, the plausible, the things that could happen, or the things that we imagine themselves to be there? It's the monsters in the dark, the things that are not likely or not even possible with our understanding of how things work. So how about you, Jenny? We'll take the snakes off the table.
Well, no, because honestly, no snake's ever done anything to me. I don't know why I have the phobia. I don't have Tonia's reason, okay? No, and thank God I don't have Tonia's reason. Okay, but no snake has ever done anything to me. The only snakes I've ever met were friend snakes where, I'm fighting my fear and they're shoving their snake at me and it's a little boa or it's one of the giant, I'm trying not to get my daughter to have the fear, so I'm petting the snake while screaming inside. But no snake's done anything to me. I'm just terrified of them. There is no logical reason. It's just that it's just hardwired in somewhere in the bone. I'm afraid of snakes. I'm not afraid of spiders. It's not like I want one crawling all over me, but I'm not afraid of them. I'm not really afraid of rats. I'm not afraid of some of the, the other vermin triggers. Mine's just snakes. Other than that, my biggest problem with horror is that I believe it. If I'm seeing it, if I'm reading it, if someone's telling me about it, I'm just like, yep, that's real. Okay, I don't care. I'm just like, when it comes to horror, I'm just incredibly gullible. I'll just believe anything is real. If I screamed, I was terrified of Fright Night, if that gives you guys any example of my level of scaredy cat. I screamed in terror in Fright Night more than once. And my little brother screamed, it's a comedy. It's like, no, it's not. But I can believe that. I can believe all of it. So it's more than I'm susceptible. In the fear of the dark, I know is the fear of what's out there in the dark. And other than nighttime snakes, I'm not really afraid of anything real. So I guess I'm afraid of the what it could be, the made up stuff, the stuff that isn't real. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to be afraid of humans because most bad things are going to be perpetrated upon you by another human being. But because I'm mostly fight when it comes to that, I'm not as scared of it. So I guess I'm more scared of the illusion of whatever it is. Because like I said, snakes have never done
you can't fight.
Pardon?
things you can't fight, the things that you can't
Yeah,
fight, like you
yeah,
can't see
yeah,
them,
yeah.
so you can't fight them.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's it.
How about you, Shannon? What are the things?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what are the things? Is it much, or is it the things that are much more plausible and realistic, especially considering a lot of the things that you write, or is it much more about, like you say, the patterns in the wall?
So let's get horrible. I actually shut down an entire book of horror essays because they could not bear to either spike my essay or publish it. When I was 2, my mother married a pederast. And I will argue to my dying day about the difference between pedophiles and pederasts because it does make a difference. When I was 2, my mother married a pederast. We didn't get to send him to jail till I was 9. So I try desperately with all of the fear, all of the fight I have in my body to be afraid of illogical things as much as humanly possible, because otherwise I'm just afraid of other humans 100% of the time. Other humans can do things to you that nothing else can. You know, a disease can kill you, a wolf can eat you, a snake can envenomate you, but another human can make you a completely different person and traumatize you for life, and you can't come back from that.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Tonia?
Aside from echoing what Shannon just said, you know, absolutely. I think humans, that's why in a lot of the stories that I write, the monsters are not the monsters, you know, the humans are the monsters, because that's been my experience as well. I will say though that I have been afraid twice in my life, genuinely afraid. And once it was, I guess I was probably 13 or 14, and I woke up in the middle of the night. And I don't know what woke me up. I just know that I woke up and I felt like someone was in my room. And it was dark in my room, but it wasn't like pitch black. You know, the moonlight was kind of coming through, so I could see, you know, if there was someone in my tiny little room, I could see it. But I didn't see anybody. And like, I just kept feeling that there was something in my room, and it was something big, you know, something that took up a lot of space, not necessarily physical space, but like energetic space. And I had this voice in my head yelling at me, screaming at me, turn on the light, turn on the light. And I was too terrified to move, because like to turn on the light in my room, I didn't have a lamp by my bed. I had to get out of the bed, the room, to turn on the light. So I was like, absolutely not doing that, kind of thing. And then, you know, finally that feeling went away, and I still have no explanation to this day why I felt that. Like, I don't know if it was like a residual nightmare sort of situation, or if there was really something in my room, because I do believe in ghosts. I've seen ghosts. I have been able to describe people I have never met to people who have met those people. So I believe ghosts are real, because I have tons of personal experiences that show me ghosts are real. Like, I told my mom what my grandfather was buried in, and he was a rancher. He never wore a suit. Of course, he was wearing a suit in his casket. Never saw him wearing a suit before then, but he came to see me before he was buried. My mom about it. So I do believe that there are entities in this world that sometimes we can see them and sometimes we can't. The second time was I was living in a duplex with my ex-husband at the time, and our dogs were acting just kind of weird. Like, normally they'd be right up under us, you know, ready to catch every little crumb, you know, that we dropped. But they were staring at a corner, like just over my left shoulder, like the corner of the room. And I thought, you know, that's weird. And, you know, look behind me thinking, you know, there's got to be like a bug or something on the wall. And that's what they're staring at. There's nothing on the wall. And, you know, and I kept looking and checking, still nothing on the wall. And then I felt something lean on my shoulder, not just, you know, something putting like its hand on my shoulder, but like pushing down on my shoulder. And I was like, I'm crazy. This is not actually happening. And I got really quiet. And 1 or 2 minutes later, my now ex-husband says, I just felt something really weird. And like my heart started to race. And I was like, oh my God, did he feel like something on his shoulder too? And I was like, well, you know, what did you feel? And he was like, somebody was sitting on my lap. And I was like, somebody was leaning on my shoulder, you know, like, cause you know, at that point it's like, all in my head. Like, I'm not making this up. The dog see something there. He felt something. I felt something. Something is in this room with us. And at the time, I had practiced Wicca in high school, you know, like all teenage girls, I feel like, do at some point, you know, they experiment with some kind of magic. And that was the only thing that I knew to do at that point, was like, you know, cast some sort of protective spell. And so that's what I did. And then, you know, a little bit later, the dogs kind of calmed down and they stopped doing their weird whiny thing and, you know, like looking nervous about everything. And they just, you know, laid down and took a nap. And I was like, okay, we're safe. But those are the only 2 times in my life that I've been like genuinely afraid of something happening to me. And I've had like encounters with a lot of like positive entities, you know, that you can't see, like, you know, positive energy, or, you know, whatever terminology you want to use to explain it. You know, I feel like for the most part, those entities don't want to hurt us, because overwhelmingly my experience has been very positive. But those 2 times, whatever those things were, did not mean to be nice to me. And I don't know if they just couldn't harm me, or they decided I wasn't worth it, or, you know, I mean, like, there's just so many questions. So, you know, I think about that a lot, you know, is like, one day, is it going to be something that is powerful enough to hurt me, or is it just like a line that's just never crossed? You know, like, I don't know the rules of the spirit world, right?
Don't go willingly to Midian. It doesn't take you.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing, like the real life thing, concrete thing that, you know, I assume everybody believes in, that I'm afraid of is, and this is what the novel was about, and I didn't realize that this is what I was writing about until I was about halfway through it. But when my dad died, he had gotten into a car accident and hit his head on the windshield, got a brain bleed. They did brain surgery. He had some seizures, which kind of rendered him like they had to put him on a breathing tube. Like, he didn't know what was going on, essentially. And they kept telling us, you know, he's going to get better. His brain's going to recover. It just needs some time to rebuild those neural connections. And I grew up with him telling me stories about like Haitian zombie lore. So not like, I'm going to eat your brains, zombie, but I'm going to resurrect you from the dead and control you and treat you as a slave kind of zombie lore. And I did make this connection while I was with him in the hospital. I would go visit him every weekend, and I would hold his hand to see if I could feel any energy in him, to see if he was still there or if he was just a shell. And, you know, I never felt anybody in his body. Like, he always felt like a shell. And like, I was thankful for that, because I wasn't entirely sure that he wasn't trapped in his body with like his mind still firing on all cylinders, you know, knowing what was happening to him. Because I know that was a big fear for him, because I mean, he told me those stories growing up all the time, like, you know, don't send me to any funeral home you don't know about, because I'll be like, it was a cautionary tale, you know, that he told often. And, you know, I was really afraid in the hospital that he knew and was aware of what was happening to him. And I'm afraid that that kind of thing, you know, might happen to me at some point. That's a genuine fear I have. Not necessarily, you know, somebody like resurrecting me from the dead, but, you know, locked in syndrome. Essentially, you know, it's a medical phenomenon that is not super well documented, but it's documented.
How about you, Kiki?
I think that my fears are mostly about the implausible, and I think that is primarily because it's not something that you know how to fight right away. Like, if you're attacked by somebody, or if you're, you know, in a jungle where there are snakes, there are things that you can do as a person logically to keep yourself safe. But when it's a demon or a ghost or something like that, you don't have any of those tools available to you. So you're just basically helpless. And I think even when I have fears that are of real things, like of sharks, I generally end up spinning them so that I am afraid of it in an implausible way. Like, I don't go into the ocean because of sharks, and that is logical to me. But I am also afraid that a shark might have accidentally made it into a pool and I didn't know about it because, you know, it was a baby and it was living, I don't know, in the gutter thing, and now it's big enough and it's hungry. So yeah, I think all of my fears are based in the implausible.
How about you, John?
I think currently my biggest fears are of powerful people who make rational decisions, and we can't do anything about it except pray that, everything will work out all right. On a personal level, I used to be deathly afraid of driving in the snow, but given my job was to respond to crime scenes in all kinds of weather, no matter how bad things got, I quickly overcome that fear out of necessity. I'm not, I spent 40 years on the streets seeing what terrible things one person can do to another. And that was overcome by the fact that my job was to help put these people in jails. So, on a broad sense, I'm afraid of, situations over which I have no control. Personally, I'm pretty good. Horror fiction can frighten me if it's well written, but it doesn't really scare me.
Well, and I appreciate everybody kind of taking this really personal dive, because as writers, these are all the influences that come to us. These are the things that we're working with when we're both reading stories as to how we interpret them, but also how we craft the stories. These are how we go and take those influences to build the next generation of story. So Seanan, for you, taking a look at your experiences, those things that you fear, how have these things influenced all the work that you've done over the years?
Well, they've made me very sensitive to seeing it in other people's work and seeing especially how often my cis male peers in horror will use sexual assault as if it were bacon. They want to season their work for it. It has no relevance. It is not load bearing to the meal. If you take it away, nothing changes, but they think it'll be more exciting if it happens in chapter 2. So I actually never to write anything related to that stuff that scares me, because y'all know that is not to say no one should be writing that. There are people that have handled that topic very sensitively in a non-eroticized way and in what I call a load-bearing fashion. Robin McKinley's Deerskin is a beautiful example of that. If you take out the assault, the book falls apart. So there are stories where it's necessary, but it doesn't get used that way. So I avoid my own experience. That said, I am afraid of diseases, like any sensible person who read The Stand when she was 9 years old. And as a consequence, I study diseases exhaustively and write about pandemics almost exclusively as Mira Grant. 90% of Mira's work is about global pandemic and how we'll react to it. And I've been right about everything except other people caring whether I lived or died.
Yeah, right.
How about you, Tonia? How has your fear shaped your work?
Oh, obviously, like the book that I wrote, obviously based on that fear that I had. And, like I said, when I first started writing it, it was very much a subconscious thing. It was just, I had this idea of a character for a story, and I just started writing, and it just kind of like came out. I didn't outline or anything like that. And then about halfway through, I was like, oh my God, I'm writing about my dad dying. Like, I can't do this. And that was before I'd gotten my PTSD diagnosis. So I didn't know that I had PTSD from watching him die. And I didn't know the coping skills that I needed to be able to continue processing that trauma through writing it. So I shelved that for a really long time, until after I'd gotten my diagnosis and, been in therapy for a while and got the tools that I needed to be able to get through what was essentially like a re-traumatization of the situation. And like I said earlier, a lot of my stories are unexpected, and not just because like I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan and I love doing twist endings and things like that, but because more often than not, the person, entity, whatever, that I lead you to believe is the monster is actually not the monster. They redeem someone else who was victimized by the person that we thought was the protagonist from the beginning. Not all of my stories are like that, but a lot of them are like that. And a lot of them, I've, come to realize that I write a lot of revenge based stories as well. And I think that harkens back kind of, to my childhood, like wishing someone had, saved me. I had a cousin who was like a brother to me that was murdered when I was in high school. And, that guy never really saw the inside of a jail cell. He saw it for other reasons, but not for killing my cousin. And, that was something that shaped me a lot as well, was, this idea that he deserved to be punished for what he did to my cousin and for what he did to my family. Because he was honestly like the best out of all of us. Like we all loved him. If anybody in my family admitted who their favorite was, it would be that guy. So, it wasn't just him that got hurt. And, I remember being in high school, just like desperately wishing that I could be made a vampire or a werewolf or something so that I could go and get revenge on my cousin's murderer. So I think that has the fear of people getting away with things that they shouldn't get away with factors a lot into my work as well.
How about you, Kiki?
Well, I mean, I write romance. It's not horror romance. It is strict gay paranormal romance. But I feel like I'm still taking two people who are very afraid. They're not afraid of monsters or ghosts usually in the beginning, but they have these emotional fears that they cling to, and throughout the book I am able to soothe those fears and to sort of take away any sort of barrier that would keep them apart, that would keep them afraid of each other. So I think that is where my love of horror has definitely influenced my writing. And also in that the stories that I write, there is always this aspect of overcoming, of figuring out how to attack and kill the big bad monster. There's always a very clear, victor that they figure out to find the sword at the last moment or whatever they're fighting. And I think that has come from horror as well, because I've never been a fan of the ambiguous ending horrors. Those tend to stick with me and make me really upset as a person. So definitely in my books, I make sure that there is a clear victory over that thing that scares you, that is scaring, that is preying upon everyone.
How about you, John?
Hey, first of all, Kiki, I kind of agree with you. The one thing I never liked about, and this might be heresy, everybody, one thing I never liked about H.P. Lovecraft were the endings of, as I'm writing this, the horror, and that's it. I never really liked those kind of endings. When there is a monster, when there is an evil, I won't say monster, but if there is an evil, I want to see the evil defeated. I tend not to write about the things that scare me. I like to write about the things that are going to scare other people and, my reader. So that's, and I've been told, there's two examples. One, I wrote a story for an anthology, which was supposed to have an illustration for each student. The artist was not able to complete that because my story creeped the hell out of him, and he just couldn't go on. So I creeped out an artist. So I mean that's a personal high for me. And and by the way, it was who mentioned Bloody Mary? Baltimore has its own Bloody Mary. She's called Black Aggie. Same thing. Just look up Black Aggie. Anyway, Black Aggie.
When we get done tonight, you can go run and give it a try. Let us know how it goes.
Yeah. Anyway, there's another story a friend of mine, Patrick Thomas, said it might be the scariest story I've ever written, and it has nothing supernatural about it. I did it deliberately, and it's basically it's a terrorist who puts people in a situation. He gives them two choices. Neither one of them is good, but if they don't choose one of them, terrible things are going to happen to other people.
And you, Jenny, what have you got?
So many things. Well, I write horror as J.C. Koch, and when I write horror, I tend, most of the time, the monster is the protagonist or gets to win in some way. Just because I like doing that. In many cases, I think a lot of things get termed monstrous, even though they're not necessarily evil, or they're less evil than, wait for it, humans. For everything else, I similar to others, had a very unpleasant childhood. My mother was fucking batshit crazy, and that does mark a person. And so a lot of what I do is I will give my heroines. I didn't do this in the Alien series. Kitty has a great life. Kitty has great parents. Kitty has the family I would have liked to have had. But she is afraid of snakes, so there you go. But I give my female protagonists terrible parents, just like the worst parents in the world. And then they have to overcome that and become heroes in their own right by basically not being anything like their parents. So that's kind of how I deal with that. I mean, I think Tonia said it best, was that, if my fear is based on things I can't see to fight, well, I knew what I had to fight growing up. And I don't care. I don't care what monster we create. Even the boogeyman that Stephen King created is not as frightening as a human being with power over you. That's way more frightening than anything else. So when I'm doing that, my girls suffer, but they get the best men. That's how I look at it. But that's how I deal with it.
And I think that kind of leads to the last thing I want to touch on tonight. Again, all of us are here as writers and creators. I mean, we use our experience. So with the stories we tell, both in ones that you've written and other things that you've read, what are the things that may have taken and helped you process out? Because we all have our own traumas. We all have our own issues. We all have our own things that have come up. What are the things that either you've written, you've read, that really have helped you? And how can other people that either reading or writing use some things that most people would consider horrific, whether it's horror, whether it's just in the paranormal romance, whether it's in anything? How do you take these things and use them, whether it is to learn from the experience, to help you process through it, to help you explore it, and to help take away the power from those things? So Tonia, how about you?
I think for me, it's mostly a subconscious process. Like, I don't necessarily realize why I'm writing a story about until I'm at least halfway through it. And then I might realize what it's about. Sometimes I won't realize until I'm done why I actually wrote the story. But, like I said, when I was little, I used to tell myself bedtime stories about monsters coming to save me, so I've always used storytelling as a way to sort of take back some of my power and, show myself that just because I don't have power at this particular moment doesn't mean it will always be that way. And like I also mentioned, the whole revenge arc in a lot of my stories is, me taking situations again where I was powerless and sort of creating situations that are analogous to them where I have power in that situation. I will say, though, that a couple of years ago, I got a divorce, and it was a really messy, painful divorce. He's now married to my best, which made my PTSD so much worse. But even just like writing about that in a journal has helped me so much, and going back and reading what I wrote in a journal. So not even something that's fictionalized as a horror story, going back and reading it and seeing how my perspectives have changed over time has really been really helpful for me as well. But I think I process a lot subconsciously through fiction, and it's not until I've processed it subconsciously through fiction that I can start to think about it on a more conscious level.
How about you, Kiki?
I think that for me, I've always been a very anxious person. I have anxiety, and horror was always a way that I could experience, controlled stress. I can put myself in a situation where these heart pounding moments are occurring, not to me, but it feels to me enough that it sort of feels real. And in these moments, something amazing happens because I'm able to think, what would I do? What would I do in that situation? And so instead of facing the stress and being afraid of it or running from it, it sort of makes me feel empowered. And it makes me feel like if I were in a situation like that, maybe I could do this thing. Maybe I could pick up this axe and shove it in this man's face or whatever. So I just feel like it allows me to rise to an occasion that I might not have. And I would just like challenge people to sort of seek out those things that scare them the most, put them in that situation and just sort of like marinate in it, and just get to a point where you can think past being afraid and think, well, what would I do? And then just see what happens.
John?
Okay. Yeah, I wrote a story once. It was called A Clean and Pure. And at the time I was writing it for an anthology, and unfortunately the everybody liked it but the editor, so it didn't get into the anthology. But when I didn't realize what I was doing when I was writing it. I had been going through some personal problems, a lot of tension and all that. And it was only after I'd finished the story that I realized I was starting to feel a lot better. I hadn't written anything for like 6-7 months. I wrote this story, and all of a sudden I felt better. So writing is a way of working out trauma that you may or may not realize you have.
Jenny?
I agree that writing is a way of doing it. I'm always very, very aware of what particular trauma or life event or fear it is that I'm dealing with. I go in almost always very intentionally in what I'm going to write, whether it's dealing with, a trauma here, or I'm angry about this thing over here. I don't like that person there, and they're going to die ugly in the book, right? I'm sure I haven't done that except every single solitary thing I've ever written. But I'm very intentional. The novel, when I was basically learning to write, you could tell I had a manager from hell at work, and you could literally tell when I had a bad day because the body count would just go off the charts. There's one chapter where my heroine has killed 50 bad guys at one time, and it's just because I was so angry, right? And then I go back and go, well, I'll have to fix that later, but right now I got to go kill a few more bad guys because I'm still pissed. But I'm normally very intentional about it. It's not I don't have the realization of, oh, that's what I'm working out. I know what I'm working out. Part of what I'm doing I'm going to deal with this part of this trauma in this. Not all of it, not the whole story might not be about that trauma, but this section is going to deal with that, and I will get that through. So so I'm much more intentional about it. And as for what I think it's just what works. You know, everybody's different. So what works for any one of us is not necessarily going to work for somebody else, or it is. You know, we are different yet similar. But I think I think it is cathartic to be able to put pain or fear or trauma onto the page and work through it so that your characters can overcome something, because it's in your mind, and your mind gets to see you or the characters you created win. So I like that part of it.
Shannon?
I'll be honest, everyone has had such interesting things to say. I have completely lost track of what the actual question was.
Well, it's taking the stories. You know, how do we as writers, you know, both take stories and craft them for processing our own experiences, as well as how can readers take and use them for processing their own experiences as well. You know, how can our stories help people? You know, especially when you've got the higher body count.
I mean, one of the things I have discovered is that if I'm writing at more than 10 pages, I'm terrifying, but I'm not a good horror writer, because I am more interested in the scalpel than the viscera. So I will always pursue the science. I will always pursue the logical consequences. I will spend 2 years talking to marine biologists so that I can build mermaids that could actually live at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Like, my mermaids are completely biologically plausible. I'm sorry, and you're welcome. So I don't so much heal traumas as give them, like shiny baubles. We are currently in a world situation that we cannot discuss. I wrote a novella several years ago called The Kingdom of Needle and Bone, which deals with something very similar, and people keep reading it and then yelling at me. And I'm like, I have literally told people, do not buy and read this piece of my work until the current world situation is resolved. Why did you do that? Well, because I thought it looked interesting. I told you no, you're not the boss of me. No, I'm not. So why are you yelling at me? You know, exactly.
Sounds like the perfect marketing.
Yeah, I am not here to fix anyone else's trauma. I'm still dealing with my own. Now, I did hear Ginny mention that, bad family situations. My mother reads the October Day books, a 16-volume series that is really characterized by the presence of incredibly terrible mothers. Just bog awful mothers, abusive, narcissistic, self-absorbed mothers, and she doesn't see anything wrong, because that is the magic of narcissism. Yay! So I do have people say that it is cathartic for them to watch bad mothers be overcome, or at least survived, and occasionally horribly divorced. But I'm not setting out to do that for them, and I am not your therapist, so please do not come to me expecting me to make things better.
Well, I think that's a good place to end on. But before we get out of here tonight, let's make sure that everybody knows where to find you, social media, those new releases. And the one thing I want you to add on tonight is, what's the one thing somebody needs to go pick up and read? What's the one thing that they need to make sure that it'll give them a nice bit of the horror before we're out? So, Kiki, how about you?
Okay. You can find me basically everywhere. I'm Twittered, Instagram, Facebook, Kiki Burrelli, at Kiki Burrelli. Just type Kiki Burrelli in Google and you'll see me. I have a recent release, came out last weekend. It's Envy. It's a fourth in a series, Wolves Resurrection Road, and there is a lot of fun sort of trips into hell and demon kings that appear throughout the series. So sort of some of what I was talking about about like overcoming the big bad is very present in those. And if you haven't read The Green Ribbon, you need to go and read The Green Ribbon, because it's terrifying. Just pretend like you're 8 when you read it.
I told you you'd be sorry.
Yes. Oh, it shivers.
John?
Hey, you can email me at jfrenchfam@aol.com. You can find me on Facebook. You can follow me on Book Club. I think the two things horror related you really should read of mine is Monsters Among Us, which contains what has been called the scariest story I've ever written, and a recent book, Frankenstein, Monsters of the Abyss, which puts in all the stuff that Patrick Thomas and I thought Mary Shelley left out, and explores what the nature of a monster truly is.
Jenny?
My website, ginikoch.com. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, not Instagram, even though it looks like it. Please stop sending me messages. I'm really not getting them. I say that, and then one of these panels here, some people send me Instagram messages. I guess they think I'm kidding. I'm not. In terms of horror, there's a wide variety of things. It depends on if you want happy horror or not. For happy horror, get The Night Beat, which is the first in my Necropolis Enforcement File series. And that's a lot of fun. It's paranormal. For scarier horror, Secret Guide to Fighting Elder Gods is good. It has a nice story, Pickman's daughter, in it. You can see why and how I let the monster win.
Seanan?
If you can spell my name, you can find me, because I am the only Seanan McGuire currently hanging out on the internet. ... All of the others are cousins of mine, and they are sheep farmers in Ireland. For something frightening that I really do think you would benefit from reading, T. Kingfisher, which is Ursula Vernon's pen name, has written a book called The Twisted Ones that actually creeped me out. Like, I was reading the book while I was eating dinner, and then I hit a point in the book, said, oh, and put the book down in my plate of spaghetti so that I could get up and walk away. And if that's not good enough for you, try reading Spillover, which I have seen behind Tonia. It is about the way that diseases move from animals into the human population, how frequently that happens, and how completely unpreventable it is. And that will steal some sleep.
Tonia?
Okay, you can find me at Mystifying, MISSDEFYING, on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, even though I don't do anything on TikTok right now. You can find me, Tonia Ransom, on Facebook. You can follow me there. You can listen to Nightlight wherever you listen to podcasts. And I was trying to look up one of my episodes to give you the episode number, but I can't remember. But I think Sorry, Wrong Number is probably one of my favorite stories that I've ever written. That is published on the podcast that I think folks should check out. And obviously my book Risen as well. It'll be available in print hopefully next month, depending on how fast I can get that working. As far as something terrifying to read, I wouldn't necessarily say I don't really get scared from books and things, but I really, really loved This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. Really good book about grief and strange entities and just weird stuff happening that I super enjoyed. Also, to kind of piggyback on something that Seanan said, my degree is actually in medical librarianship. And one of the things that I'm working on off and on is a book about the science of monsters, basically how different mythological creatures could exist biologically. And there's actually, if you go to the Multiverse YouTube channel, I gave a talk on sirens and mermaids and how they would exist biologically, and specifically how sirens could kill you with sound, because the US military has actually done experiments. I also gave a talk that's not public yet about how zombies could actually exist in humans, not just the fungus kind, the girl with all the gifts, but also prions, which are misfolded proteins, mad cow disease. That is probably hands down the most terrifying disease that can happen to a human being. So, just read up on prions and you'll definitely be awake for weeks.
Or don't, if you like sleeping.
Yeah, if you like sleep, then yeah.
We
Don't
can't
do that.
detect them. I'm not allowed to donate blood because I've spent too much time in England, and they can't be certain I don't have a
exactly. Yeah, they're if you spent, what is it, more than 6 months In
Yep.
the UK, they won't let you donate blood because so many people got mad cow
Mhm.
disease. If you were to ask me how zombies would likely come to exist in a human population, it would be prions.
Well, and I want to thank everybody for coming in this evening, sharing a lot. And I have had the pleasure of being your host, Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, continualconvention.com, at the speculativefictionacademy.com. And of course, like I say, hanging out here Continual. And we will see everyone next time to give you a few nightmares. But if you need something to look up the zombies to have a little fun, read Wade Davis's original book that led to The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Oh, I have that one back here somewhere. Yes.
I love your wall of books on which nothing can be found. It is genuinely delightful to me.
I mean, it's pretty hard to find anything on this bookshelf, but I did find your book finally. It's right here.
Oh, good. Yeah, I see it
I'm
there.
pretty sure The Serpent and the Rainbow is behind some of these other books because I've already read it. So if
Yeah.
I've read it, it's behind something else for the most part.
I have no books, just a giant plush iguanodon.
It's okay.
And you have the monsters behind you.
Yes.
That is true.
And tonight, that has been all about the things that scare us. We will see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Sleep tight.